can succeed at the one thing my sister never could.
While the direct-to-DVD Disney sequels may not be as bombastic as their theatrical contemporaries, these mid-2000s films still have some pretty satisfying ends for their villains. Some simply see jail time, while others have endings on about the same level as the greats. But which are the most gruesome? I'm Andrew with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney sequel Villain Fates, Gruesome to Most Gruesome. First up, we have a short section dedicated to the villains who barely had to face any punishment for their crimes. These are the ones who got away with it. For the first spot on our list, we feel that the sequel villain with the least amount of consequences was Tarzan 2's Mama Gunda. A mama gorilla with a huge temper and two brash bullies for sons, these three cause quite a bit of trouble for both Tarzan and Zugor, especially when they find out the latter isn't actually a monster, but a gorilla like them. Although it's Gunda's guidance that leads her sons to doing things like destroying Zugor's treehouse and putting other characters in danger, she sees absolutely no consequences for any of her actions, her influence over her boys, or even her nasty attitude.
This place could use a little remodeling.
In fact, it almost seems like she's rewarded for it, given that she and Zugor end up falling in love. Heck, her sons get more punishment than her, since we see her forcing them to apologize. If that doesn't show just how much of a karma Houdini this mama gorilla is, we don't know what will. Moving on to one of a few theatrical villains in this list, next up is Arthur. This Wreck-It Ralph 2 character is a virus that Ralph unleashes onto Slaughter Race in order to try and slow the game down. Obviously, this doesn't go to plan. Though he doesn't have much personality to speak of, Arthur is insanely skilled at finding insecurities and multiplying them to the point of nearly destroying the entire internet with his Ralph clones. What's more is that once all the Ralphs are on the loose, Arthur essentially disappears, leaving the audience to question where exactly he went. For all we know, it could still be out there, exploiting insecurities and causing damage in smaller corners of the internet. Of course, there's always the chance that Arthur could be destroyed by a firewall or other antivirus software, but because we don't ever see this happen or even hear the characters say that this is a possibility, it just seems all the more likely that this little virus got away with his crimes. From the internet to the junkyard, Buster is next. Being the main villain in Lady and the Tramp 2, this dog is nothing but trouble. As the leader of the junkyard strays, Buster is arrogant, selfish, petty, and even possessive at times. Though he's no criminal mastermind, he still causes enough trouble for Scamp and Angel with his revenge schemes that it feels pretty satisfying when he gets trapped under junkyard garbage. Now, he only gets trapped, mind you, not seriously injured or killed. And while his still being trapped is the last we see of him, it's not too far-fetched to imagine him eventually escaping on his own. He also loses the loyalty and friendship of his junkyard dogs, but since he only saw them as tools, this is more of an inconvenience than anything too emotionally devastating.
Somebody open this thing!
For these reasons, we'd say that while Buster does get some karmic retribution, he still gets off fairly well despite his awful deeds. Even without his fellow junkyard dogs, Buster is still a free dog who avoids ever getting caught by the dog catcher, and who is fairly strong and skilled in his own right, so we feel like he wouldn't have any trouble being on his own. You could argue that he was still punished in a sense, but compared to others who were actually locked away, or worse, Buster basically just got a slap on the wrist. Next up, we have Aladdin's Abyss Mal. Traitorous, greedy, and not all too competent for the most part, Abyss Mal served as a decent secondary villain in Disney's first ever direct-to-DVD sequel. Perhaps it's this status that allows Abyss Mal to walk away relatively unscathed in comparison to someone like Jafar who, you know, dies a slow and painful death. Really, for all the trouble that this thief causes for Aladdin and the other heroes, the only real consequence that Abyss Mal sees is that he loses out on his third wish and he briefly gets stuck in a tree. His ending is more comedic than anything else, and he's allowed enough of a free rein to come back multiple times in the Aladdin TV series to the point where he's actually considered Aladdin's arch nemesis in that show. Honestly, we consider it to be a pretty good trade-off, and we're sure a lot of other Disney villains would have wished for more screen time over going to jail or dying. Finishing off our first category, we're just barely going to allow Eric Hellstrom to squeeze in. Briefly known as the Modern Odin, Eric was the main villain for the Atlantis sequel, which showed him attempting to create Ragnarok with the help of his lava and ice beasts. He is, in every sense of the word, a mad king whose only goal is to regain any sense of power he had lost after losing his company and all his money in a stock market crash. We should also mention that, in addition to literally trying to destroy the world, he also kidnapped Kita and stole an ancient Atlantean spear. But it would seem that even in regards to those more minor crimes, he still doesn't see any real punishment other than his plans being thwarted.
Say your goodbyes to this world.
At most, it's probably likely that he was sent away to an insane asylum, which, on the other hand, you could argue that losing his sanity and being sent away is still a punishment. That being said, however, it does feel just a bit unsatisfying given that he, again, almost destroyed the world. Next up, we have the ones who saw jail time. A more typical end for some of these villains, but at the very least, it's still some sort of punishment. Starting off, we have Lil Lightning from 101 Dalmatians 2 Patch's London Adventure. Yeah, compared to the other Jason Alexander voice villain that we have on this list, Lil Lightning doesn't get off nearly as easily. Although he's a fairly competent villain in his own right, his lack of any real power makes him all the easier to defeat in the end. Not only does he get arrested by the authorities, who obviously don't believe his claims of him trying to help Thunderbolt, but a briefly seen newspaper also all but confirms that the stunt made Lil Lightning lose whatever amount of popularity he might have had. So, even if he didn't end up staying in the pound for very long and eventually got released or adopted off screen, it's very unlikely that he would ever have another chance at doggy fame and fortune. Perhaps that's his real punishment in addition to being arrested, making this ending all the more satisfying for this fame-hungry corgi. In a similar fashion, we have Marina Del Rey. Though she could hardly compare to Ursula or even Morgana in terms of spectacle and power, Marina still wasn't afraid to fight for the authority she wanted, whether that was through backstabbing Sebastian and getting him into trouble, to being desperate enough to try and kill Ariel with the plan of making it look like an accident.
I never liked her anyway. I'll make it look like an accident, that's it!
Yes, this fashionista's got fangs, and for all her treachery and crimes against the underwater crown, it's no surprise to see her at the very least end up in jail, complete with a not too appealing uniform that we're sure she absolutely hated wearing. But while she still received proper punishment, hence why we couldn't put her any lower, we also felt that we couldn't put her any higher. She literally tried to kill Triton's youngest daughter, a princess, and she still only gets jail time. It just feels a tad underwhelming, especially when compared to our other Little Mermaid villainess on this list. But don't worry, we'll get to her. In the meantime, let's stop over at the final Lilo and Stitch sequel to learn what happened to Dr. Jacques von Hamsterville. In Leroy and Stitch, Hamsterville is able to escape from prison with the help of Gantu. Afterwards, he forces Jumba to create a new experiment named Leroy, which soon turns into an army of Leroys that is able to take over the Galactic Alliance. Of course, Lilo, Stitch, and the other experiments are able to defeat the Leroys through the power of music, and once the army is overpowered, Hamsterville is once again sent to jail along with all his Leroys. Perhaps this fate doesn't seem all too harsh given how used Hamsterville already was to being in jail, but at the same time, we imagine that being surrounded by your failed army is a constant reminder, as well as being forced to listen to Earth music all day, adds that extra bit of salt into the wound. Rounding out our arrested villains is the incredibly vain Sarouche from The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2. Much like Hamsterville, this ringmaster turned narcissistic thief actually came pretty close to his goal of stealing La Fidèle, the jeweled bell of Notre Dame. However, just before Sarouche was able to escape with the bell, Madeline and Quasimodo are able to rescue Zephyr, who he was using as a hostage, allowing Phoebus and his guards to then arrest Sarouche. While this is for the most part a fairly standard arrest, what really adds to it is that Sarouche's true form is revealed during it, as he loses both his wig and his corset during his detainment, adding a bit of extra humiliation to the whole ordeal that makes it just a bit more harsh than the other arrests in this category. Finally, we've reached our last tier, the gruesome ends. Whether it's a permanent end or simply a defeat, these are certainly the most painful and gruesome ends that we've seen from these direct-to-DVD sequels. Just outside of our top 5 most gruesome fates, we have Bradley Uppercrust III from an extremely goofy movie. In all honesty, we're sure that Bradley probably wished that he could have just been arrested, given that he'd probably be able to buy his way out of jail. But instead of getting arrested, or even just humbled for all the damage that he caused during the X Games, his willingness to put not just other athletes, but also his own teammates in danger comes back to bite him hard when Tank decides to get a bit of revenge. With his immense strength, Tank is able to give Bradley an atomic wedgie that launches him to a terrifying height and into the X Games blimp. This is both a humiliating and painful, but still pretty hilarious end for Bradley. And the only reason why it doesn't get him put any higher is that he didn't actually die from this. Or at least, we're pretty sure he didn't. Moving along, next up is King Runard from Frozen 2. Because he dies before the start of the film, we don't get a ton of screen time with King Runard. We do see the extent of his evil, eventually learning of how he betrayed the Northuldra people, and while he may die on the battlefield, the fact that he was still able to seriously hinder the spirits within Northuldra through his dam almost makes it seem like Runard won in the end regardless of his demise. Or at least, that's how things would have ended if not for his granddaughters discovering the truth and setting things right by destroying his dam and his legacy. Add in the fact that his death on the battlefield battlefield was a pretty painful and frightening one, as we see him falling off a cliff during a fight with a Northuldra tribe member within one of the film's many flashbacks, and we're able to give this fate a fairly high ranking. From a king to an almost queen, Zira is next on our list. Though she put up a good fight, much like Scar before her, Zira just couldn't handle the loss of her forces. She does try to kill Kiara, but ultimately ends up in peril herself. Kiara does give her the opportunity to save herself, but Zira's pride and hatred end up being her undoing, leading her to falling to her death. We're unsure if it would be the fall that would kill her, or if her drowning in the rushing waters below would be more likely, but either way, it would be an awful end for her. Honestly, the only thing that may soften this fate is that, ultimately, it's Zira's choice to go out on her own terms, something that, to her at least, is more appealing than being saved by one of her enemies. Not sure if we can agree though, as this would still be a very physically painful end for anyone. Earning the bronze medal of gruesomeness is the gold-themed deathless Saluk from Aladdin and the King of Thieves. Honestly, it should have been expected to see this death so high up on this list. The story of the Midas touch is pretty horrifying on its own, but actually seeing someone succumb to its power was its own type of shocking. What's more is that his death has different levels of gruesomeness to it depending on your personal interpretation, such as how painful it would feel to have your body literally turn into gold, or how long Saluk would remain alive, or even aware of himself after being fully encased in magical gold. Whatever way you go with, it doesn't take away from this being a truly memorable end to one of Aladdin's fiercest enemies. For our silver medal of gruesomeness, we go to Beauty and the Beast: The Enchanted Christmas, where we have Forte. Truly a memorable sequel villain, mostly thanks to his uncanny design and his very hammy voice courtesy of Tim Curry. But while he's able to stand out as a villain in his own right, his death is also fairly memorable. When all of his attempts to break up Belle and the Beast fail, he takes it upon himself to try and kill them both, stating that they can't fall in love if they're dead. In order to stop Forte from completely destroying the castle with his big show-stopping song, the Beast was forced to rip his keyboard away from him, which in turn ceased Forte's contact with his pipes. Considering Beast essentially just ripped his arms off, ouch. But if that wasn't enough, Forte gets so angry that he tears himself off the wall he was once attached to, leading him to completely collapse. Who would have thought that the destruction of a pipe organ could be so violent? Even without any sort of blood, it's one of the most gruesome endings we've seen from these sequel movies, but in our opinion, it's still not the most gruesome. And at last, our gold medal of gruesomeness is going to Ursula's crazy sister, Morgana. Maybe it's a bit predictable, but we feel it's warranted. Much like Saluk's death, this one focuses a bit more on magical imprisonment than on pain, only instead of gold, Morgana is trapped within a block of ice. The thing is, we know that Morgana remains alive for at least several minutes after being frozen, as we watch her panic while she sinks to the very bottom of the ocean. Again, there's a bit of personal interpretation that could be done with this one. Either she slowly suffocates and eventually dies, or the magic nature of the trident-produced ice keeps her in stasis, frozen and trapped in the ocean for all eternity. Makes you shiver just thinking about it. Either way, we can easily say that this is the most gruesome fate that any of the Disney sequel villains receives.